Women have the most eggs in utero as a fetus, around 20 weeks of gestation, and they have about 6 to 7 million eggs. After that, the number starts declining. At birth, we have about 1 million. Around puberty, we have a few 100,000, and at menopause, we have about 1,000 eggs. As the number of eggs declines, your fertility potential declines. Next slide. In their 20s and 30s, a woman's monthly ability to get pregnant, like we said, was about 20 to 25%. However, in their 40s, it dropped significantly to a mere 5% per month. Fertility rates decline about 1 to 4% per year before the age of 35. After 35, fertility rates decline about 15% per year, and after 40, it can drop to about 30% per year. This decline in fertility is currently irreversible. So we know that women are waiting until after 35 years old to start their families. However, the significant decline in fertility starts at 35. That's why understanding the available fertility preservation techniques is so important. We also must consider the quality of the eggs, which is also affected by age. As the quality declines, the chance of chromosomal abnormalities like Down syndrome or miscarriages also increases. This, unfortunately, also starts around the age of 35 years old. It isn't that every egg is of poor quality as you get older. It's just you have a higher percentage of having eggs that are poor quality. In our 20s, we have about 80 to 90% of our eggs that are genetically normal, compared to about 50% when we're in our 30s and about 10 to 20% of genetically normal eggs in our 40s or older. The last thing we also need to consider is pregnancy complications, which also increases as a woman ages. Next slide. Here are the national 2016 stats of pregnancy rates for in vitro fertilization, which is an advanced fertility treatment used for couples with infertility. As you can see, we'll go ahead and click. As the age increases, the pregnancy rates, given all of the same factors, declines quickly, just over a few years. Next slide. So what can we do about it? First, we need to make sure that women are educated about the topic, and that's why I'm here today, is just to talk to you about this topic. 1 in 5 women are unaware of the impact that age has on fertility outcomes and pregnancy complications, and about 80% of women that underwent fertility preservation wish they had completed the process at a younger age. If you're still interested and still concerned about this, be proactive. Consider fertility preservation, or at least learning more about it. Fertility preservation is the act of doing something now to increase your chance of pregnancy in the future. There's 2 options available. One of the options is egg freezing, which is the process of preserving your eggs by removing them from the ovary and freezing them for future use. They can later be thawed and combined with sperm to produce an embryo to attain pregnancy. The beauty of this process is twofold. You do not need a partner to undergo preservation of eggs. And second, your chance of pregnancy is associated with the age of the egg, not the age of the mother at the time of pregnancy. So if you froze your eggs when you were 30 or 31, your pregnancy success rates will be over 50%, even if you use these eggs when you're 38, 39, or 40. Another option is embryo freezing, where the embryos are created by combining eggs and sperm right away and then frozen as embryos for future use. This is very similar to in vitro fertilization and has been done since the 1970s, so therefore it's very reliable. However, the drawback to this option is that you need a partner or a sperm source to be able to do it. In 2013, the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, or ASRM, which is our national body, recommended that egg freezing, also called oocyte cryopreservation, no longer be considered experimental. We had been using egg freezing safely for decades under an experimental designation for cancer patients to preserve their chance of having a family prior to chemotherapy, which can destroy eggs. However, we recently made advances in techniques used to freeze the eggs, making the process more reliable and more successful. This is the reason the experimental designation was lifted. And now this process can be expanded to not just patients with cancer or things affecting ovarian reserve, but to women who want to delay starting a family, which is called social egg freezing or elective oocyte cryopreservation. So, next slide. When is it time to consider medical consultation and treatment? Egg quality and pregnancy rates start declining around the age of 35 with a significant drop after 37. So like we talked about in all the slides preceding this, everything seems to start around the age of 35. Each woman's situation is going to be different. There's always a financial part of this to talk about, and we will go over it in a little bit, but it is not a cheap process. There's a social part of it. Do you have a partner? Do you have a sperm source? Are you thinking about doing embryos? Are you thinking about doing eggs? And what's your timeline? Do you plan on having kids in the next year or two, or are you thinking 4 to 5 years down the line? So our current recommendation is any woman in her early 30s, not in a steady relationship or not wanting or planning for children until after they turn 35 years old should consider at least a medical consultation. Any woman with a disease that requires chemotherapy or will affect their ovarian reserve, and there's a list of a few of them that will, should also consider consultation. So hopefully I've gotten your attention by now. What's next? So what does the process look like? The first step is a consultation and medical evaluation. So talk to a doctor to discuss your specific case. Again, every case is different and all of the factors must be taken into account. Next, get testing of your ovarian reserve or your egg count through hormone levels drawn through a blood test. Your doctor may also do an ultrasound at the beginning of your menstrual cycle to be able to see how many eggs you have available during that cycle, and that can also indirectly relate to your ovarian reserve. If you choose to move forward, the next step is starting the freezing process, the egg freezing process. It requires daily oral and injectable hormone medications for 10 to 12 days. So you will be required to give yourself shots every day. In a normal menstrual cycle, we produce about 1 egg per month. The point of these medications is to force the ovary to produce many, up to 20 eggs at the same time. So therefore, we can then only hopefully have to do this once. You will have about 5 to 6 appointments over a 2 to 2.5 week process. So you will have many visits to make sure you're responding to the medication properly and safely. You will also need to have time off for work to attend all of these appointments, and each one lasts around 15 minutes and involves blood work and a vaginal ultrasound. The third step is the removal of the eggs itself. So that's the oocyte retrieval. That's a same-day surgical procedure lasting about 20 to 30 minutes. It's usually done under anesthesia. Every office is different, but most offices will do it under anesthesia. You will not be able to go back to work that day, so you will have to take a day off for your procedure. The surgical process involves removing the eggs from the ovary through the vagina, like illustrated in this picture here, and it's attached to an aspirator, so we actually put the needle inside each of the cysts that contain the egg and then suck out the egg in the process. The eggs are then isolated under a microscope. We determine which ones are mature enough to be fertilized in the future. And at this point, only mature eggs can be fertilized with sperm to be able to create a pregnancy. So you can see here in the pictures below, there is an oocyte, and once it's frozen, it becomes an embryo. Oocytes are made of 1 cell. Embryos are made of hundreds of cells. And this is the reason why embryos survive the freeze-thaw process a lot better than eggs do. We then use a method of flash freezing called vitrification. These eggs are then frozen within minutes and stored in liquid nitrogen until future use. The frozen eggs are then transferred usually to a long-term storage area until they're ready to be used. Once the woman is ready to get pregnant, you have step 5. The eggs are then thawed and combined with sperm to create an embryo. This embryo is then put inside the uterus to attempt pregnancy. Next slide. How many eggs do you need to store? So there's no magic number, unfortunately, and there's no guarantee that a pregnancy happens with stored eggs. So that's something that needs to be taken into account. You have lots of problems that could arise along the way, from creating the eggs and storing them to actually creating a pregnancy. They have to survive the thawing process. They have to combine properly with sperm to make a normal embryo. That embryo then needs to grow appropriately and then needs to then take inside the uterus to create a pregnancy. So we haven't figured out the process perfectly just yet. The rule of thumb is that if you're less than 34 years old, you want to have about 10 eggs to have one child, so one live birth. At 35 to 38 years old, studies show that you need about 15 eggs for one child. And if you're greater than 38, there isn't very much data available because there aren't very many people doing this at that older age, but the aim is for about 20 eggs or more for one child. Again, the success is tied to the age of the eggs that were and when they were removed and stored, not the age of the woman when she decides to use them. Can fertility preservation treatments harm the baby or the mother? There are risks with every single procedure, so that has to be taken into account. The risks to the women, first and most commonly, are side effects of medications. These are hormones, so most people are very moody and irritable when taking the medication. So it doesn't really affect you, it affects the people around you. And then ovarian hyperstimulation, which is where your over responds to the medications that are being used. And instead of producing 10 to 15, 20 eggs, you produce 40 eggs. That can make a person very sick and require hospitalization. There are risks to the procedure being performed as well. The most common surgical risks include infection and bleeding. And the eggs or embryos, like we talked about, may not survive the thawing process or may not create a pregnancy. There are risks to the baby as well. These are the same risks as babies born to women who underwent in vitro fertilization. Most commonly, preterm labor and low birth weights. There's a risk of twins. This is something that we always talk about in patients undergoing IVF. However, the risk of twins is bound to the number of embryos we put back inside the uterus. So if you only put one embryo in, your risk of twins is around 5%. If we put in more than one embryo, your risk can jump to about 30 to 40% for twins. So again, nationally, we're trending towards putting in one embryo at a time. There is also a 1.3-fold increase in birth defects associated with in vitro fertilization. This is actually still very low, which is around 1%, and we don't know if this is tied to the actual infertility diagnosis or the procedures itself. So how much will this cost? Most insurance companies will cover the initial consultation and testing. Few insurance companies will actually cover the treatment for egg freezing. So a lot of patients are doing this with out-of-pocket costs. The average out-of-pocket cost around the country is around $7,000 to $10,000 for one attempt. Ideally, if you do this young enough, you will only need one attempt. You also need to take the storage costs into account, which is approximately $1 a day. Usually, most places will give you a free year before they start charging you for storage costs. You also need to take into account the cost of medications. These medications are not cheap. They're around $2,000 to $3,000 in total. For comparison, IVF costs around $15,000 to $20,000 for one attempt. If you do delay and wait, usually around 38, 39 years old, people will have to undergo multiple attempts to be able to actually have a child. So that's where this cost starts growing exponentially. As you get older, you will need higher doses of medications as well. So the higher medication costs will also be included. You also want to keep in mind the emotional burden of infertility in the future. It's very hard to perceive now when you're young and when you haven't gone through it. But believe me when I tell you, my patients are very stressed when they're going through this process. And so if we can avoid that for you, it would be very helpful. So quickly, in summary, what are the pros and cons for fertility preservation? The pros of fertility preservation include it's an insurance policy, and like all insurance policies, it's meant to give you a peace of mind for the future. It allows you to delay childbirth without risking future infertility. However, as we'll talk about, this is not 100% guarantee. There is no need for costly fertility procedures in the future as long as this works. There's no need for a partner, but you can also freeze embryos with a partner if you'd like, and that still is considered fertility preservation, and it's safe and effective. The cons, of course, the high initial costs. It won't, you're saving yourself money for potentially in the future, but you will have to put up those upfront costs. It does not guarantee children in the future. Success is still age dependent, so the earlier you do this, the better. There will be surgical risks associated with the procedure that we can't forget, and also with the medications. And embryo survival after the freeze-thaw process is higher than the survival of eggs. So that's the reason why you need more eggs per child frozen rather than embryos per child frozen. So that's the one con for egg freezing. So egg freezing is, of course, not for everyone, but the knowledge of fertility decline and the options available to combat it is. Now, at least you know the basics of fertility preservation. So if you're still interested and want more information, please call your local fertility specialist for more information. And if you need to, you can reach out to me and I can try and find you someone in your area or give you recommendations. I don't know everyone across the country, but I can at least look things up for you. I don't know if we're going to do questions right now or at the end of everything, but I know Crystal has a wonderful topic to present next.
So I'm comfortable holding out for a minute so that if folks have questions, they can go ahead and start typing them in. Alvin has a question. I don't know how to get it though. So somebody else is going to come over to this computer and drive that along.
Okay, so Alvin says, does the cost depend on the situation interested? Does the cost depend of the situation the interested party is affected with? Option one, a patient using it as a lifestyle choice, an effort for career preservation versus could be facing a genetic disorder. Yes, so that really depends on your insurance company. If there is a genetic or a particular medical reason why you need to do fertility preservation, you're more likely to have that covered by your insurance company. However, the overall costs will still be the same if you have to pay for it out of pocket. Do we have any other questions?
There is a question from Angela. Do you think the cost will decrease in the future? 5 years ago, it was much more expensive. Was it much more expensive, or is it about the same as now?
So that I think depends on socialization of medicine. So it's going to, that's a whole nother topic, a bag of worms, I guess. But I do believe that if the actual techniques and the medical techniques become more streamlined, then the process will become cheaper. It really does require you to do a little bit of shopping in the area that you're in and what part of the country you're in. In Ohio, where I am, our costs are a lot cheaper. We're right below 7,000. Whereas if you go to New York or if you go to Atlanta or California, your costs are going to be more expensive just generally for this process.
All right. Do people travel out of state to do this?
Yeah, I have some people that come to me from Pennsylvania. I've got people from West Virginia. I've got people from Wisconsin. They come to us. Usually this is mostly because their insurance companies or, they're with the VA and they have a tie with our University of Cincinnati. And for some reason, that's the reason they have to come to us to have it covered. But we do have people who travel out of state to places that are cheaper to have it done, just to save some money.
All right. Are there any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Suruchi.
Perfect. Thanks, guys.
So my name is Crystal Trauner. I am going to be talking today about women in the engineering workplace. So really focusing on that first year or two of your career, and then how to have that kind of translate out past those first 2 years, but using those first 2 years to really build your cornerstone of your foundation. I graduated with a Bachelor's of Science in Mechanical Engineering in 2011. I am now a registered project management professional, and I focus on engineering project management. I have worked in almost every industry so far. So I started out in automotive, where I did defense work for survivability systems on military vehicles that went to Iraq and Afghanistan to try to preserve human life in situations where people don't really want to be. And then I did a variety of different things as a tier 1, tier 2 vendor to the automotive, oil and gas, aerospace, medical and nuclear industries. Subsequently, I went into the packaging industry for a little bit of time to get a better understanding of those processes and capability flows. I am currently an engineering project manager for modernization at BAE Systems, so back on the defense side of the world, taking a facility from World War II and bringing it into the 21st century to improve safety and throughput capabilities. So today is International Women's Day, and with that in mind, I did kind of want to start by looking at the numbers. So according to the 2017 graduate report from ASME, there were 124,000 bachelor's degrees awarded in engineering fields. Of those, 26,000 degrees were earned by women, which is just over 21%. 64,602 degrees were awarded for master's degrees in engineering, of which 16,602 were earned by women, so just about a quarter. And then of the just about 11,500 doctoral degrees that were awarded, 2,700 of them were awarded to women, so 23.5%. Of all of these women who work so hard on these degrees, about 40% of them will ultimately decide to quit or never go into the field. So one thing that's kind of important to note in these numbers, though, and I do have my citations below, they consider somebody like me, who is an engineering project manager, to no longer be an engineer, even though I am actively engaged in engineering work practices and I oversee engineering work. Because I am at that managerial level, I am no longer considered an engineer. So an engineering manager, a chief engineer, those types of positions, even though you have engineering in your title still, they don't really count. So this is somewhat misleading, but a lot of these women also will quit the engineering field because as they are going into these roles, they're allowing themselves to be relegated into more administrative tasks, where they might be on an engineering team, and when data is collected, they're the ones who are taking that data and collating that data, not the ones gathering the data. When they're working on a construction project, in a plant where you're bringing in new equipment, they're managing the vendors and bringing things in more so than the integration piece, more so than actually the application of their degree. Because guys, to some extent, on accident or on purpose, depending on where you're at, kind of elbow their way into pushing women out to some degree. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about is kind of creating your space, defining your space, and not allowing that to happen to you, so that you don't become part of this 40 percentile descriptor. So the US Bureau of Labor Statistics anticipates that between 2016 and 2026, there will be approximately 140,000 new engineering jobs across all sectors, most of which are going to be in that civil engineer, mechanical engineer, and industrial engineer realm. The least of which is going to be agriculture, materials, and mining. Those jobs just are very specific. There's not a huge amount of turnover, and so the replacement of jobs is really just when somebody retires. Whereas with the electronic side, so like if you look at the petroleum up, those jobs are typically new jobs that are actually being created. You're not really doing a one-to-one replacement. Which when you look at that in like a resource like LinkedIn, it really does make sense. So I just did a quick search on engineering jobs in the United States for entry-level, internship, and associate level experience. So basically, as you're coming out with your bachelor's degree, these 3 levels are really the types of jobs that you're going to want to apply to. You're going to have to kind of dig through these because some of these are going to be duplicates. Some of these are going to be really awkwardly worded where it doesn't seem like it's going to fit. But the way that this kind of all comes out is of the 24,000 people that are graduating with engineering jobs, there are 277,000 jobs that are available. So yes, there are some people who graduated in the previous year who you're going to be fighting with them a little bit as well. But one of the major differences that I see when I'm getting in resumes and applications is a man will apply for a job even if he is not qualified, whereas a woman will only apply for a job if she feels like she has mastered every single requirement on that job form. You do not have to. And I will always tell people that, men and women, if you feel like you can get there and you can learn, go for that job, even if it is at an associate level. You don't get what you don't ask for. So you might need to start with that internship level application just to kind of get that experience, and that's fine. But don't not apply to that associate level job because you don't feel like you're good enough, because you are. So I just kind of did a search between a bunch of different sites to look at the entry-level positions that are available across all the different engineering fields. And this is just like the quick chunk that I found. This doesn't even scratch the surface as to all the different types of engineering jobs that you can get right out of college with no experience. So you can go for something that has your major specific title in it, like electrical engineer, mechanical engineer, chemical engineer, whatever. But you should also be looking at things that have to do with things around you. So if you are a civil engineer, maybe you want to be more out in the field and have more experience with like mud engineering or geotechnical services or something like that. Or if you're a mechanical engineer, maybe you want to get more into the design side, so you start looking at design engineering jobs or manufacturing engineering jobs, or you want to very specifically delve into brake systems, so you apply for brake systems, fluid systems, whatever. These types of things are sometimes a little harder to find when you're doing your search, especially if you're relegating yourself to very specific starting functions like LinkedIn. So when you're starting that initial approach, I think everybody should go with the shotgun approach. It's so much easier to find something when you don't know what you're looking for. So that entry-level position really is to just get your foot in the door. So it's not really necessarily about what that first job is, so much as like where it is that might make it interesting to you. So I currently work for a company called BAE Systems. We have 93 entry-level positions open across our organization. We have about 1,001 locations around the world, which is pretty huge for most companies. So I just grabbed like a couple different locations with a couple different types of entry-level positions to just give you guys some examples. So we have positions from a maintainability engineer all the way up to a optomechanical engineer because of the types of systems that we work on. And each location that we have, they really specialize in something different. So we have locations where all they do is software and all they do is minor hardware development for weapon systems. And then we have locations like mine where we manufacture explosives, and we are really focused more on building new buildings and improving processes. So each one of these jobs, so a mechanical engineer 1 in York, Pennsylvania is going to be different than a mechanical engineer 1 in Kingsport where I work. So if you're interested in a company like this where it's huge, you have lots of opportunities, there's lots of different ways to go, you can just go through here and find something that seems mildly interesting to you and start there, and that's fine. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work, and that's okay. If you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. This is one of my favorite quotes because I think that there are so many people who are like, what does that even mean? I don't want to go to work. I just need to make money so I have something to live off of. But then there are people who are so passionate about what they do that you see them and you're like, I don't understand how you are that person. Or you're one of those people and you're like, I don't understand how you don't love this. This is amazing. We make this widget all day, every day, and it's magic. But there's a huge difference when you're in college and you're assuming that you know what you want to do versus getting into something and realizing what you actually love to do. I started as a design engineer because I thought that's what I was going to love to do. Then I moved over to manufacturing and I loved manufacturing. I would work 60 hours a week in the plant just trying to improve processes, getting prototypes through the door. I loved it. It was amazing to me to see something actually come together and actually work. That's a huge difference in a role between that design piece and that manufacturing piece. But if I hadn't done both, I wouldn't have known. So sometimes you're going to start in a place and you're like, I thought I was going to love this and now I'm disappointed in myself. Don't be disappointed in yourself. It's fine to not love the first thing that you do, but keep looking because you do need to keep doing it. So moving from college to career, that's kind of like that next big adventure. So you moved away from home to go to college theoretically. Now you're going to go and do something else outside of college, which is a very different world. So you kind of have to think about what you expect both from yourself and from your company. So I expected when I moved into my first job, the ability to collaborate with other professionals, having a strong environment of innovation, brand new laboratory environments, training that was going to be specific to my job, people who were excited to be there, and an open creative environment where I could interact with them. What I got was a desk in a cube farm. I got very generalized training, quote unquote, for my job, quote unquote, because they hired so many of us right out of college. Me as a defense side body engineer, I got the exact same training as a chassis engineer in commercial, as a thermal engineer in engine. All of us were treated exactly the same, even though our job functions were fundamentally different. But I did get the best boss ever. I was very lucky with that. My work was incredibly interesting. I got to blow things up and shoot things, and that is, for a mechanical engineer, one of the best jobs you can get. And I got to build trucks that were so cool that I couldn't help but to be excited every day about that. But the most important thing that I got was the ability to shape my career. I got that because I had the best job ever. But the ability to shape your career into what you want it to be is something that you don't just get. You have to ask for that. You have to say to the person who is helping you along, hey, I think I like this. Can you tell me more about it? Or I don't really like this aspect of what I'm doing. Am I doing it wrong? And start to form and mold your position in your company to get the experiences that you want to have so that you can better anticipate your future. So one thing that I recommend to people who are new is to watch everybody around you all the time. So who is doing what? When are they doing that? Where are they doing that? Why are they doing that? So that who, what, when, where, why approach applies far beyond elementary school when you're doing your reading tests and stuff. You want to watch which people are interacting with a project or with a product at what time. What are they doing with that? How is that changing as they're moving forward? Is there a way to do that better? Is there a reason why they do it that way? Anytime you are concerned or confused about something, asking that question of why is fundamental to you getting better at that. Even if you're not fundamentally interested in that long term, having a basic understanding of what that is and why that is will drastically impact how people take you seriously as you move forward. Always absorb all of those things around you, and when something doesn't make sense, just ask about it. If you ask questions, especially to crotchety old guys, then you will have such a better career. The most grouchy people at a company know a lot, typically. So if you are nice to them and you ask them questions, they will be nice to you and they will help you. If there is someone at your company that is doing a job that you find very, very interesting, or if there is a process at your company that you think is lacking, go and talk to the people who are around that. If the person that you're interested in ultimately being is available, try to get into their network. Work with your boss to reach out to them if you feel uncomfortable about making that first connection. But go and ask that person who's in charge of that process. Go and ask the person who's doing that job that you're interested in what they love about it, what they had to do to get that job. If you have a very rigid structure in your organization, including your supervisor in that is very appropriate, just so that they're aware of what you're up to, so that they don't feel like you went around them, especially if that person that you're interested in talking to is like way above them in the totem pole, just so that you're not stepping on toes. Also understand that sometimes when you're reaching out to people for these mentorships or mentor moments, they might not have time, and it's nothing against you. Always start with like something small when you're trying to start those conversations, like, hey, could I grab coffee with you? Like, don't ask for anything permanent up front. Just like small mentor moments are going to help you along just as much as those formal mentorships. So on the other side of that, when you are pulling in these mentor moments and like looking at these different processes, you're creating the ability to adjust the progression scale that you're on. So as you're learning more things that are outside of you, so long as you're continuing to get your stuff done, you can kind of create a subspace for yourself to exist where, like, if you don't have an interest in being a manager, you don't have to be. So you can sidestep and continue to improve your career and continue to move forward from a technical perspective just by continuing to learn more things that are in your job. So if you were hired to be, like, let's take a car, for example. If you were hired to work on the body of that car and you were hired specifically to work on bumpers, but you kind of have an interest in door handles, start talking to that group, start seeing what you can learn from them, start seeing if you can spend time with them. And then you might be able to sidestep into that eventually. Familiarizing yourself with your career path and options at your organization is something that I recommend as early as possible. So this is something that you should work on with your HR partner and your supervisor. Whichever one is kind of more comfortable for you to talk to is the one that I would suggest starting with, because sometimes HR seems really unapproachable, but sometimes people, their first boss makes them really nervous. So whoever you feel more comfortable with, start talking to that person and talk to them about what kind of training you would need to do, if there's a rotation program at your company that you could maybe get into. Are there outside development opportunities that you should be looking at? So like, how do you get to that next step if that next step is what you want to do at that company? But the number one thing that I think is the most important is identifying your stop points. This is the hardest thing that I had to learn, because anytime somebody asked me to do something, I said yes. Without question, without hesitation, no matter how many hours I had to work that week to make sure it got done, I said yes. I will take care of that. I am your person. I will get that done. And it is exhausting, and it is not always helpful. You need to recognize when you have pulled too much onto your plate and say, I am happy to help with that. I would like to learn about that, but I cannot right now. And that is okay. Or if you are being pushed into a managerial role because somebody thinks you would be good for that, but it makes you uncomfortable, that is a stop point. And you are okay to say, I can't do that right now. I am happy to continue learning. I cannot do that right now. So that you're not alienating that opportunity in the future if you do change your mind, but you don't feel forced into it either. So capitalizing on opportunities that build up to that is difficult at times, but these opportunities aren't magic. You have to kind of craft them for yourself. You're responsible for managing your expectations. No one around you can do that for you. So if you come into something looking for opportunities, you're more likely to find them. If you're perpetually putting yourself around people, asking questions, getting into people's stuff, sometimes you're going to be annoying. So you need to be careful about that. But find the balance to make sure that you're being respectful of those spaces and still able to get yourself into projects, into assignments, into training classes, into wherever you need to be delving for nuggets to add to your arsenal to make yourself a stronger professional. You're responsible for doing that. Nobody's going to do that for you. I recommend joining professional organizations that you have interest in or that are related to your field. So whether that's ASME, PMI, AIAA, IEE, whatever it might be, especially that local chapter, so that you have people who are older than you, who have experience, who are not connected to your job, that you can say, hey, what do you think of this? Hey, I'm thinking about this. Especially if you think you might eventually want to leave the company that you're at, having that outside professional network will help you land somewhere else. So this idea that no one can give you better advice than yourself is nonsense. I think that there are so many people on this planet who have so many interesting things that they have experienced and that they know, that this idea that I know better for me, not always the right one. So I reached out to some women in my network to ask them two very simple questions. If you could go back and give yourself advice just before you were about to graduate, what would you tell yourself? And if you were a young woman who is entering her chosen field, what would you expect in the first year or two? So I reached out to a couple different industries of folks that I know. And one of my friends in the automotive industry, she said that she would tell herself it's okay to not be perfect because jobs are meant to have a learning curve and no one expects perfection on day one. And the more questions you ask, the better off you'll be. And within those first 2 years, she would suggest that that learning curve is steep because mechanical engineering jobs require a lot of background knowledge on products and processes that are impossible for you to learn in school or to know right off the bat. Being a good engineer requires knowing the ins and outs of your product being developed from concept to creation, and that takes time, and it also takes effort from a larger network of people, which you will grow as your career does. So I'm going to echo this because she and I actually started on the same day at our first job. And so we had a very similar experience with our first 2 years of work. I found angry old guys to be my biggest advocates. They were the scariest people when I started there. But the more I asked them questions, the more I showed up and was in their space, the more helpful they were to me because I didn't know the difference between a ceramic and a metal armor package other than the fact that one was ceramic and one was metal. I didn't know how to do this, that, and the other thing, but they did. They'd been doing it forever. They helped. So you got to build that little network. You got to ask those questions. You got to get into it. And you got to be okay with the fact that you don't know. If you show up acting like you know everything, no one is going to help you. You are going to be on your own. One of my friends in the industry of providing energy to all of us in our homes. Some of you may be familiar with the company that she works for around here. She suggests that you approach every one of your classes, whether or not it's engineering, with enthusiasm, and to take a broad range of classes if you have that time in your schedule so that you can develop a variety of skills. It's really easy for engineers to focus on STEM classes, but it's important to broaden one's perspective in preparation of the workforce. So even though some of those auxiliary classes might seem annoying, you'd be surprised at how they come in to help you in the future, especially if it improves your writing skills or your ability to communicate. Within the first 2 years, she says, there will be challenges with conveying your originality. As humans, we want to stand out to make an authentic impact. In the first year of work, that impact probably won't happen. So expect to make a professional connection and really learn the job within the first few years. Then find ways to create positive waves and challenge the status quo as you move forward. And I would agree with that. It is hard when you're new to be like, hey, I'm awesome, without being a jerk. So you need to start getting into it, learn the ins and outs, then start pushing yourself out there. In the civil industry, no one knows what they're going to do, so don't be hard on yourself. If you don't have everything figured out right away, take your time and be at your own pace. So that's great. That's wonderful advice to young women, especially, and young men. This section, I think, applies to both genders very nicely. In the first 2 years, I feel like my field is getting to be pretty 50-50, so thankfully it's balancing out. However, there are areas of civil engineering where you're likely to be in minority as a woman, and it can be daunting, but feel proud of your choice in this field. Ask questions and get engaged as much as possible. It'll help you in the future as you get into the mindset of exploring and being curious about all the new experiences. Join women's groups and organizations to bond with others. I haven't personally experienced a lot of misogynistic comments, but have heard of others, so be aware of that. And don't be afraid to stand your ground and speak against those sexist comments, usually from older men who have been in engineering for a long time and have a set way of thinking, because those talks are no longer tolerated. So I will echo this. I still have things sometimes where like old guys will just say something and I'm like, no. Listen. And like, you don't have to just sit there and be like, okay, this guy's above me on the totem pole, I have to listen to this. You're okay to say, hey dude, no. Like for me, a lot of the times it comes back to the fact that like, I'm not married, I don't have kids. I'm like, yeah, congratulations, way to notice a thing. That doesn't matter to me. I'm here and I'm doing a good job. That's what matters to me. So just make sure that you're standing your ground, but doing it politely. Just because somebody's being a jerk doesn't mean you have to be a jerk. Chemical industry. So learning doesn't stop at graduation, and often what you learned in school isn't directly applied to your work. Yes, you need to know the basics, and that's really what you guys are doing here at Illinois Tech. You're learning the basics, you're learning how to think. But there are a lot of job-specific concepts and tasks that you will learn on the job. Be patient with yourself and don't be afraid to ask questions. The onboarding process varies greatly between companies. So some are very slow and take a long time before letting you get into things, whereas others will have you immediately starting on projects and tasks. This is something that's really important to understand. Companies that have a lot of onboarding, where they're constantly bringing in new people, are inherently going to be better at it. Companies that are older, smaller especially, and more well-established in what they do will not necessarily think to tell you all the things that you don't know, because they've known it for so long that they kind of forget that not everybody knows it. So when you're starting in someplace new, just kind of have that in the back of your mind of how many other people are starting with me. If you're starting by yourself, ask to be paired with somebody who's been there that you can learn from if they don't do that already. But keep in mind that priorities change daily regardless of where you're at. Remember, you're a part of a team, so you can use them as a resource. Just don't forget to reciprocate when your teammates come to you for help. It is important to maintain good coworker relationships, as without them in the future, collaboration could be difficult. Technical skills are important, but soft skills are just as crucial. If you find yourself in a situation where you don't have enough work to do in a day, don't just goof off and surf the web. Take the initiative, talk to your manager to see where else you can help, and maybe reach out to teammates to see if you could shadow them to learn more. You're there to work, and you don't want to give a bad impression from the get-go. So there may be times where you don't have more than 40 hours in a week, and that's okay. I think it's really interesting in engineering. So many of us think that we have to work 50, 60, 70 hours a week. There are going to be weeks where you don't have that much work to do, and you're going to feel like a slacker because you like left at 40 hours, but that's okay. You need those weeks too. While it's not a good habit to consistently work an excessive amount, it is important to understand where the extra hours go. If you're spending extra time troubleshooting an issue with a team, i.e. to get to the plant up running again, remember that this sacrifice made now is a learning experience, and it can help you address a future problem more quickly, or maybe even prevent it altogether. One of my friends in the biomedical industry, she works on drugs right now. So she's saying that she would suggest that soft skills are just as important as engineering and analytical skills. Being able to communicate and work effectively in a group will get you a lot farther than just hard skills alone. What you learned in school does not prepare you for everything you will face. Coming as an entry-level engineer, the organization will typically teach you what you need to know or give you direction and training. So while it may seem intimidating, remember that everyone started where you are, and you will get better at what you do. So lots of consistent themes there. Ask questions. Be okay with the fact that you don't know everything. Get involved. So my challenge to you today is I challenge you to take your first step towards a fulfilling career, which may or may not be what you started with when you start the journey. I challenge you to step outside of your comfort zone and network, join affinity groups, employee resource groups within your organization or within a professional organization. Join philanthropic organizations, join a gym, just make sure you get out and you engage with people. When you leave college, that tends to be difficult, especially if you're moving away from where you went to college. So you want to make sure that you're getting in with a group of people so that you have support, not just at work. I challenge you to know when it's time to stop, to pause and take a breath. No one's going to tell you to go on vacation. No one's going to be like, hey, I noticed you've been working a lot of long hours. Maybe you should take a day off. That boss is so few and far between, so you need to know when your stop point is. I challenge you to walk into every room and take a seat at the table. There will be times when you are in a meeting that has more people in it than there are seats available. If you showed up first, you take a seat at that table and you engage. Be present, ask questions, and even if you don't understand everything, or even if you think something might be wrong, challenge it, ask about it, learn. People might get a little snippy with you, but it will help. I challenge you to take chances in your careers. Explore aspects that you didn't think were maybe initially interesting, but maybe you'll find out that that's the thing that you love. And I challenge you to find joy in that 8 to 12 hours a day that you spend making a career for yourself, because you are going to spend over 1/3 of your life doing that. It is so important to do something that brings you joy. So that's it for me, and I'll get off my soapbox. There are a couple of questions that are from Suruchi's talk. So Suruchi, are you still on?
Yep, I'm still here.
Okay. So Tiffany asked, can you send locations for places to call in Chicago for an initial appointment?
If you're in Chicago, I would recommend trying one of the Northwestern practices. University of Northwestern was one of the first universities to do egg freezing for cancer. So they really know what they're doing, and I would always lean more towards academic practices than private practices, because you're going to get better techniques, and you're going to get better I guess success rates in a sense, because they're going to take more time to get to know you and what you need. So that would be my recommendation for Chicago. And then if you're taking your initial, when you have your initial appointment, you don't need to stop any of the medications that you're on. If you are taking oral birth control pills, you will end up having to stop those maybe for a month before you start your process. But if you have an IUD in and you're not planning on getting pregnant right away, you can leave your IUD in. The IUD will not affect your egg reserve, but your birth control pills might.
And then Elvin was asking about practices that I've applied management outside of work. So I volunteer heavily with United Way. And when I was in Chicago, I would annually participate in the planning and execution of a fundraiser where we would try to get a little over $100,000 minimum fundraise throughout an evening. Thank you so much for coming. And so I mostly was using my project management skill set there. Very rarely did I have to dip into my engineering bucket for that one. But I also do a lot of work with STEM fields. So I do a lot of volunteering with SWE. And now that I've moved to Tennessee, I do a lot of volunteering with an organization called Streamworks. So I am judging a maritime competition where kids are making these little submarines and they have to like go through an obstacle course. It's a lot of fun. And then I'm mentoring some kids on a robotics competition and doing some fundraising and scholarship judging for a fundraiser. So there's a lot of ways that you can take that managerial or engineering practice and put that into an outside of work situation. I think that it helps, especially if you are interested in going into a more project management or managerial space to practice that outside of work. Have you found differences in interacting with managers with an MBA opposed to managers that rose through time? I prefer personally to work for and work with managers who spent time learning. Anymore, if you have an MBA, you're not going to jump right into a managerial role. So a lot of times now, folks who have their MBAs got it after they were managers, or if they got it before they were managers, they did have a little bit of time in the field. But for me, I don't have an MBA. In my last job, I was a director. I was the director of project management, and I had a $30 million engineering budget, and I had 10 engineers that worked for me, and I managed all of my stuff perfectly fine without an MBA, but that is not to say that that's going to be everybody's experience. I think a lot of times folks who jump right into getting that master's degree do a great job. I just think that you need to make sure that you're learning your basics and learning your fundamentals. I do think it is harder sometimes once you've hit that level to transition industry, so I recommend doing more of that industry transition while you're younger in your career so that you can really build out the foundation of your career house. All right, are there any other questions? All right, so thank you all so much. Best of luck and have a great rest of your day. Enjoy your weekends.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.